Good afternoon. I'm Warner Shook. I'm one of the vice chairs, and I'm taller than the other vice chair, here at the Cole House today, and we want to welcome you. It's such a great turnout. This is a bittersweet day for us at the Cole House. The sweet part is that we have fantastic Mr. Alan Wallach here to talk to you. He is, without a doubt, the preeminent scholar of Thomas Cole on two legs. And we are so delighted to have him back here. For those of you who don't know, Alan has been such an integral part for the ongoing success of this organization, just by the breadth of knowledge that he has. And you may not know this, but once a year, this very generous man comes up here and spends a 5-day seminar with our fellows, enshrining them with everything Thomas Cole. So, from our hearts to you, thank you so much for that. I learned in the theater that if you want to be in touch with your emotions and never give in to them. The bitter part, we lost our progenitor, we lost our leader. Lisa Fox Martin passed away 2 days ago, for those of you who do not know this. She was everything Thomas Cole. She ate, breathed, seduced, anything she could to help this organization. She was like an agent with one client, and we were the lucky client. Her tenacious devotion to this organization over the last 24 years is unparalleled. She, starting with marvelous Betsy Jacks, took 2 dilapidated shacks and turned them into what you see today. This beautiful building, the new studio, the house completely refurbished, the grounds, and now the fabulous new Cole Center, which our wonderful new director, Maura O'Shea, just opened a few months ago, designed by our board member, Stephen Shadley. So we are in such great shape, so much because of Lisa. Her warmth, her love, her, as I said, her fierce devotion to this place was really unparalleled, and we are forever grateful to her. She will forever live in our hearts, and we will do our damnedest to keep it going just the way she did. And we've got a great team here, and we will. So I know one thing Lisa would absolutely insist on is that the show must go on. And that is exactly what we're going to do today. So without further ado, Alan, welcome home.
Thank you.
And I'd like to introduce you to our fabulous new executive director. If you don't know her, get to know her. She is the real deal. Maura O'Shea.
Thank you so much, Warner, and welcome everyone. It's very wonderful to be together with all of you. It's a great community. It certainly is inspired by Lisa. I mean, she's created all of our friendships and connections and has made this place the very storied institution that it has become. So, welcome. My job right now is to tell you a little bit about what's going to happen this afternoon, and I really want to make sure that everyone knows that we are having a reception in the Cole Center following the lecture, and everyone's invited. We hope that you can come. We have wine from our neighbors across the bridge and some treats, so please do join us in the Cole Center following this lecture. And now I'm going to ask our incredible chief curator, Kate McNary, to come and introduce Dr. Wallach to all of us.
Well, thank you, and I just want to say I'm here because of Lisa. We're all here because of Lisa. I'm so grateful for her, and the show must go on. Alan Wallach is here with us today, and how many of you have burning questions about Thomas Cole? How many of you love Thomas Cole? Well, you're in luck because I've spent decades studying and interpreting and reading about Thomas Cole and thinking about his work. But when I have questions, there's one person I always go to. I always hear, let's ask Alan. Let's ask Alan. Let's call Alan. What does Alan think? So I'm just so thrilled to be here with our honored speaker and with you all. And as everyone said, Alan is really the leading scholar on Thomas Cole right now. So it's right now and for a long time actually, but Alan has spent over 50 years studying, speaking, writing, and teaching about the history of American art and about Thomas Cole. He is the Ralph H. Work Professor of Art and Art History and Professor of American Studies Emeritus at the College of William and Mary. He's also taught at Stanford, UCLA, Kean College in New Jersey, Boston University, Williams College, George Washington University. For his efforts in 2007, he received the College Art Association's Award for the Distinguished Teaching of Art History. Alan co-curated the major exhibition, Thomas Cole, Landscape into History. I mean, this is such an important exhibition. It was at the Smithsonian, the Wadsworth, the Brooklyn Museum. Alan's essay and the book that accompanied it is required reading for our staff and our fellows. Alan's written extensively on the history of art museums in the United States, and his latest book, Trouble in Paradise, 24 Essays on the Social History of American Art, appeared this November. And as people have said, we've been so fortunate to work with Alan for many years, and Alan has helped shape this historic artist home and studio museum, working with us on our national council, working with us as an advisor on our interpretation across the site and with exhibitions. And importantly, he shared his incredible passion and intelligence in teaching with the next generation of Cole scholars and museum movers and shakers, our Cole fellows, and as Warner noted, every year leads the Cole 101 seminar. It is the highlight of their year and inspires our work all year. So it's really a gift to have you here with us today, Alan. Thank you for coming to share your work. And today, I think you're going to help us unravel a mystery, right? Thomas Cole painted one of his most famous series of works, The Voyage of Life, twice. Why? Alan, take it away, please.
Thank you so much, Kate. Thank you, Warner. Thank you, Maura. Thank you, audience, for coming. Thank you to the staff here that makes today and every day here possible. I had written down Lisa's name when I wrote this reminder to myself, and alas, I had to cross it out. I'll just say one thing about Lisa, who was, it's hard to believe she's gone, because she meant so much to this place, and she was such a wonderful friend to the Cole House, to me, and I deeply appreciate her kindness. When I first gave this seminar, which I call Thomas Cole 101, 5-day intensive seminar, the entire staff of the Cole House took it, which was very nice and very flattering. Then, when I have given it since, people from the board come and sit in for a bit, or in one case, through the whole thing. And Lisa sat down with my little great band of 20-somethings and took the entire 5-day seminar. did the reading. One thing we should acknowledge is Lisa was a scholar and taught classics at Brooklyn College long before she became involved with Thomas Cole and Thomas Cole House. And she was the most wonderful person to have in a seminar, and as alive as any 20-something at a more advanced age in the seminar. I would also like to add that we are honored to have Paul Schweitzer here today. Paul, could you make yourself known here? There you are. Yeah. Paul is the Director Emeritus of the Munson Williams Proctor Museum in Utica, which is now known as the Munson Museum of Art, or even more abruptly as Munson. As you may know, the Munson owns the first version of Cole's Voyage of Life. Paul is the preeminent authority on the history of the series and its impact on US culture, and I owe a real debt to him for his scholarship, and I'm sure he'll correct me if I make a mistake.
Privately.
Yeah, privately? Well, okay, I can handle it publicly too. And as many of you already know, Paul's exhibition called Canvas to Culture, Thomas Cole's Voyage of Life Lives On, opened at the Munson Art Museum a little more than 2 weeks ago, and will remain on view there until May 18th. And by the way, I drove out there yesterday, and I found it just an absolutely fascinating and very highly informative show, beautifully done, as these photographs, which I pinched from an email from Paul, reveal. Paul is not only the show's curator, but also the author of the catalog that accompanies the show. And I would add that the current exhibition is a sequel to Paul's 2014 Voyage of Life exhibition at the Munson, and he is the author of the catalogs for the show as well. These two catalogs, oops, getting ahead of myself. These two catalogs, both extraordinary feats of scholarship, are indispensable reading for anyone interested in Cole's series, and they're now available in a box set. And I think Paul has the box set with him, and I wish we could just shine spotlights, but they're beautifully designed, but they also have the most, at least as far as I can tell, the most incredible scholarly finds. And one of them is, if you don't mind my citing it in this talk.
Sure.
Okay. My talk today is, it's a little complex. It's slightly longer than I would have liked, but I need to find a way to tell the whole story. So I very much appreciate your being here, and also I will very much appreciate your interest and patience. Okay. So, given the historical moment in which we now find ourselves, I think it appropriate to begin my talk with the words of Paul Krugman. Last month, the Nobel Prize-winning economist observed that science, quote, isn't a set of truths handed down from above. It is instead an attitude and a method. The attitude is that the world should be understood through observation and evidence, interpreted via hard thinking. This method involves formulating hypotheses and testing them against facts, end quote. What holds for Krugman's scientist also holds for the art historian attempting to account for an artist's life and work. Thomas Cole's career is rife with seeming anomalies, contradictions, and paradoxes. What to make of an artist who fulminated against, quote, dollar-guarded utilitarians, but also imagined himself painting an allegory of the progress of commerce for New York's recently rebuilt Merchants Exchange. This is about 1834. How to understand Cole's allegories and allegorical series, works that until the 1960s, critics and art historians considered banal or eccentric, and in any case, inferior to the artist's landscapes. Finally, this brings me to the question I'll attempt to answer today. Why did Cole decide to paint the second version of the Voyage of Life that is seemingly indistinguishable from the first? In recent years, researchers have developed convincing answers to questions of the sort I just raised. They have looked closely at primary documents associated with Cole's life and career. They have studied the social, cultural, and historical contexts in which the artist lived and worked. They have examined the theological, philosophical, and artistic traditions that influenced his thinking. And they've done so with curiosity, but also with the skepticism that is a necessary component of Krugman's hard interpretive thinking. Like a member of a jury, a researcher must try to ascertain the credibility of the historical witnesses. For example, Cole may have won posthumously the Reverend Louis Le Grand Nobel Prize, but like so many awards, it proved to be a mixed blessing. In his 1853 biography of the artist, Noble published a trove of primary materials that have proved of value to later students of Cole's art. However, comparing original documents with the versions Noble published, scholars have discovered that Cole's biographer bowdlerized the artist's letters, omitted key materials, and manipulated the facts of the artist's life to produce a narrative of artistic triumph and religious salvation. Today, Cole is remembered primarily as the founder of the Hudson River School of landscape painting. Cole's contemporaries saw him differently. In the 1848 funeral oration for Cole, a very, very beautiful piece of writing by William Cullen Bryant, Bryant praised the artist's allegories as well as his landscapes. Thus, Bryant considered, quote, the conception of the Voyage of Life a perfect poem. Noble too lauded Cole's allegories. He titled the first edition of his 1853 biography, The Course of Empire, Voyage of Life, and Other Pictures of Thomas Cole, N.A., with selections from his letters and miscellaneous writings, illustrative of his life, character, and genius. It is noteworthy that Noble's long-winded title names Cole's best-known allegorical works, but gives no hint that Cole had initially made his reputation as a painter of American landscape. Noble's title coincided with Cole's own view of his career. Early on, he had absorbed the academic protocols that had governed European artistic education since the Renaissance. He thus aspired to history painting, which, according to the academic hierarchy of genres, which you see here, represented the summit of artistic achievement. Like Noble and other educated contemporaries, Cole believed only history painting could secure an artist a lasting reputation. Because it dramatized lessons in virtue, history painting was considered superior to other types of painting. For example, in the Oath of the Horatii, painted in 1784, Jacques-Louis David celebrated self-sacrifice for the sake of one's country. Or take Benjamin West's Death of General Wolfe. Here again, we encounter the theme of patriotic martyrdom, this time in modern dress. Or consider finally West's Death on a Pale Horse. West was born in Pennsylvania, studied art in Italy, and settled in London in 1763, where he soon became known for his historical tableau. In 1772, George III, the one you know, appointed him historical painter to the court. In 1762, the Royal Academy elected him its second president, a position West held until his death in 1820. So esteemed were West's history paintings that in 1836, the Pennsylvania Academy mortgaged its building in order to purchase Death on a Pale Horse, a sublime, which is to say, a deliberately terrifying romantic work calculated to instill an unforgettable lesson about the end times. Since the 16th century, European artists who aspired to history painting had to first learn to render the human figure. Consequently, in Cole's day, students at art academies in Europe and at fledgling art academies in New York, Philadelphia, and Latin America began their training by drawing from plastic casts of famous antique statues. Once they had mastered drawing from casts, they graduated to the life class, where they drew and then painted from the nude model. Lacking an academic background, Cole did what he could. Shortly after arriving in New York in 1825, he began producing historical landscapes, paintings in which tiny figures act out historical dramas in vast natural settings. As early as 1827, the artist was attempting biblical subjects and scenes from James Fenimore Cooper's wildly popular 1826 novel, The Last of the Mohicans. In these early landscapes, the landscape itself, not the minute dramatis personae, carries the emotional burden of the story. Cole's scene from The Last of the Mohicans, Cora kneeling at the feet of Tamilman of 1827, makes explicit the sexual tensions underlying Cooper's tale. Or consider St. John preaching in the wilderness, also painted in 1827, in which a sublime landscape dwarfs the figures of St. John and his followers. And of course, St. John's message itself is sublime. Or finally, the artist's expulsion from the Garden of Eden of 1828. Here, the archangel Jophiel drives the tiny figures of Adam and Eve from the garden into a dark, stormy wilderness of rocky summits, bottomless abysses, blasted trees, and wild animals, the whole illuminated by the fire from an erupting volcano. Cole thus dramatizes Adam's fall by contrasting the beautiful and the sublime, the enticing garden with the terrifying world into which Adam and Eve are cast, the pastoral sun of the garden with the industrial fire emanating from the volcano. In other words, Cole depicts simultaneously the biblical story of the expulsion and the horrors of the fallen world of the Industrial Revolution, the world with which the artist and his contemporaries then struggled. Cole knew that historical landscapes of the sort he was painting stood above landscape in the academic hierarchy, but fell below history painting proper. So it's somewhere in the middle there. Self-conscious about his lack of training, while staying in Florence during the summer of 1831, he attempted to compensate for his deficiencies as a figure painter by attending life classes at the Accademia di San Luca. There he painted an anatomically credible nude dead Abel. Cole returned to the United States in November 1832, more than ever determined to excel as a painter of historical subjects. He was now at the height of his powers as a landscape painter. He was also at the height of his powers as a painter of historical landscape. His Course of Empire series, which he completed in 1836, proved to be a popular success. The series bears witness to the artist's improved abilities as a figure painter. For example, in Destruction, Cole based the giant statue of a warrior on a famous antique work, the Borghese Gladiator, which he had no doubt seen at the Louvre and which was often quoted in prints and paintings. And you'll observe that these are all, some of them really beautiful student drawings, although they look very, very professional, after famous antique statues, and there are no less than 6 drawings after the Borghese Gladiator. At this point, things get personal. When I was a graduate student, I developed an interest in Cole's series. I wrote a master's essay on the Course of Empire. For my doctorate, I focused in large part on the Voyage of Life. Critics and art historians may have once ignored the series or dismissed it as banal, preachy, and obvious. However, after 1948, which was the 100th anniversary of Cole's death, historians, art historians, and curators, among them Esther Seaver, James Thomas Flexner, Kenneth James LaBud, and Howard Merritt, began studying Cole's work. With the discovery in the 1960s of the second version of the Voyage of Life in a Cincinnati mansion that had been converted into an old age home, interest in the series grew, especially after 1971, when the Washington National Gallery purchased the series and put it on display. And this is what the display looked like after 1971 for many years, but now it's displayed with a lot more in the way of wall text, information, and when I go to the National Gallery, there's always a group of people going around trying to read the whole series. It also has Cole's descriptions on view. At this point, researching the history of Cole's series, I learned that in the late 1840s, the Voyage of Life enjoyed a popularity rarely equaled in the history of American art. In 1848, the first version attracted perhaps as many as 500,000 people to the memorial exhibition of Cole's paintings. That year, the American Art Union acquired the series and offered it as the prize in its annual lottery. As a result, yes, there's this thing called the American Art Union. It was actually a very important patron during the 1840s. And one of the things they did is they held an annual lottery for a valuable painting, and they also gave out premiums every year in the form of prints to entice people to join. Okay. In 1850, the Art Union, again cashing in on the series' extraordinary popularity, offered James Smiley's steel engraving of Youth, the second painting in the series, as a premium for membership. J. Taylor Brott, who won the series in the Art Union's lottery, sold it to the Reverend Gorham D. Abbott, a pioneer of women's education in New York. In 1852, when the New York State Court of Appeals ruled the Art Union an illegal lottery, The politics of this, could absorb, 2 years worth of research. Probably not worth it. Okay. So, after the Court of Appeals made its ruling, Abbott bought the steel plates for youth and hired Smiley for a lot of money for those days, about I think $8,000, to engrave plates for childhood, manhood, and old age. In 1856, Abbott announced the publication of Smiley's 4 engravings, and soon thereafter, Smiley's printed version of the Voyage of Life became a commonplace feature of upper middle class parlors. What explains the series' extraordinary popularity? Examining Cole's religious background and looking into the history of religion in the US and Great Britain, I discovered that Cole's 4-part allegory drew upon the tradition of Protestant emblem books. An emblem combined an allegorical image made up of figures and symbols that a poem or brief essay, and a poem or brief essay that unraveled the image's religious meaning. And you notice this imagery has a sort of, at least distant family connection to the Voyage of Life. In the first half of the 17th century, the English royalist poet Francis Quarles initiated the Protestant emblem book tradition. In the second half of the century, after the defeat of the English Revolution, dissent, the term which is often used to describe the Protestant sects that had broken with the Church of England, another name for them was nonconformists, because they didn't conform to the Church of England. Okay, Protestant sects employed emblem books for religious education. John Bunyan, a persecuted Baptist preacher, became the tradition's most famous exponent, not only writing an emblem book for children, but also incorporating literary emblems into his great religious allegory, Pilgrim's Progress. In Pilgrim's Progress, Bunyan has Christian visit the house of the interpreter, where the interpreter explains to Christian the meaning of a series of emblems. Bunyan vividly describes each emblem's appearance and then, via the interpreter, reveals its religious meaning. The emblem tradition, or emblem habit, as scholars have called it, lasted well into the 19th century, with Pilgrim's Progress second only to the Bible in popularity in the United States, and Quarles' emblems and other emblem books frequently republished. I would add that terms and expressions from Protestant allegories and emblem books, and especially Pilgrim's Progress, pervade the English language. For example, as the scholar Mario Praz observed, Reverend Augustus Toplady's well-known hymn, Rock of Ages, first published in 1775, draws all its metaphors from Quarles' emblems. And I won't attempt to sing it, but many of you probably know the hymn, or at least part of it. And it does begin, and you can look at the emblem, Rock of Ages cleft for me, let me hide myself in thee. Having become aware of the Protestant emblem book tradition, I realized that Cole conceived the Voyage of Life as an emblem narrative. Each painting in the series, in effect an enlarged colored emblem, is coupled with a text, which, like Quarles' poetic commentaries, reveal its meaning. For example, in the pamphlet he wrote for the series, Cole first described the painting and then added the commentary. Thus, for manhood, Cole commented, quote, "Trouble is characteristic of the period of manhood." He had a point. "In childhood, there is no cankering care. In youth, no despairing thought. It is only when experience has taught us the realities of the world that we lift from our eyes the golden veil of early life, that we feel deep and abiding sorrow, and in the picture, the gloomy eclipse-like tone, the conflicting elements, the trees riven by tempest, are the allegory, and the ocean, dimly seen, figures the end of life to which the traveler, voyager, is now approaching. The demon forms are suicide, intemperance, and murder, which are the temptations that beset men in their direst trouble. The upward and imploring look of the voyager shows his dependence on a superior power, and that faith, italicize the word that, and that faith saves him from the destruction that seems inevitable. With the artist's explanatory pamphlet in hand, viewers could easily grasp the meaning of the hazy demon forms of suicide, intemperance, and murder. By the same token, they could more readily comprehend the significance of the voyager's imploring look and prayerful stance. It is therefore unsurprising that Cole's series appealed to a popular audience, an audience that shunned traditional religious imagery as papist, but because of its familiarity with Pilgrim's Progress and other Protestant allegories, encountered no difficulty taking in the series' allegorical portrayals of the stages of life, as well as its evangelical message of Christian salvation. In 1977, I published my findings in an article entitled The Voyage of Life as Popular Art. The article summarized what I had learned about the cultural, historical, and art historical contexts for Cole's series. One question I was unable to answer, however, was why on his second trip to Europe, Cole had, in the winter of 1841-42, spent several precious months in Rome painting the second version of The Voyage of Life. I had already encountered a few clues in Cole's letters and journals, but only in retrospect did I realize there were clues. For example, while researching my dissertation, I came across a letter dated October 7th, 1841, that Cole had written his wife, Maria, from Paris. "I am not overwhelmed," Cole wrote. "I yet feel that I am a painter and that I have in my particular way achieved what has not been attempted before. And I know that were I inclined to take a stand in the old world, I should not remain unnoticed for long." The letter astonished me. Here was the founder of the Hudson River School, the leading American landscape painter of his day, imagining a European career for himself. How could that be? I had no idea what to make of the letter, but I couldn't forget it. By the time I happened upon it, I was aware that by the late 1830s, Cole was unhappy with the lack of American support for his ideas for series. Quote, "I do not feel I'm a mere leaf painter," he confided in his journal in 1838. "I have higher conceptions than a mere combination of inanimate, uninformed nature." In May 1841, not long after he completed the first version of The Voyage of Life, he set forth in his journal the reasons for his discontent. "I am not the painter I should have been had there been a higher taste. Instead of working according to the dictates of feeling and imagination, I've painted to please others in order to exist. Had fortune favored me a little more than she has, even in spite of the taste of the age and the country in which I live, my imagination should not have been cramped, as it has been, and I would have followed out principles of beauty and sublimity in my works, which have been cast aside because the result would not be marketable." End quote. Noble, who no doubt agreed with Cole's assessment of American taste, published this passage in his biography of the artist. At the same time, Another clue to the mystery was staring me in the face, but I didn't pick up on it. After he completed the first version of the Voyage of Life during the winter of 1840-41, Cole exhibited the series in a rented room at the National Academy of Design. The exhibition proved a success, and Cole wrote his friend, the artist Henry Cheever Pratt, that he had cleared $1,000 in profit. Because Samuel Ward, who had commissioned the series, had died before it was completed, after the New York exhibition, Cole was obliged to turn the paintings over to Ward's heirs. The artist had hoped to exhibit the paintings elsewhere, but Ward's executor, one James S. Huggins, forbade it. Cole proposed taking the paintings to London and trying to sell them there, offering to assume all the risks involved in such an undertaking, but Huggins refused. I was well aware of Cole's frustration, but I had no idea how the facts added up or what they had to do with Cole's decision to paint a second version of the series. Several decades later, when I wasn't looking for it, so often happens this way, I discovered an explanation. How that happened is in itself a story. So let's begin with the story's dramatis personae. Three American artists, in addition to Cole, are involved. The first, famous in his day; the second, successful and well-known; the third, obscure and now almost completely forgotten. Portrait of the artist is a young dandy. This is in the age of Beau Brummel. Washington Alston I was a wealthy patrician from South Carolina who graduated from Harvard in 1800, studied with Benjamin West in London, became friends with Washington Irving and the poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge, married the sister of the celebrated Unitarian theologian William Ellery Channing, and achieved great success in England as a romantic history painting. His huge, and I do mean huge, 13-foot-high painting of the dead man restored to life by touching the bones of the prophet Elisha, which he exhibited in 1814, created a sensation. You can see it's a very Michelangelo-esque sort of painting. The Pennsylvania Academy purchased it in 1816, mortgaging its building to do so. I think that's the only way they figured out they could acquire works of art, by mortgaging their building. So they must have beaten a track between the Academy and the mortgage broker. As London's leading history painter, Alston was in line to succeed Benjamin West as president of the Royal Academy. But in 1818, he suddenly left London under mysterious circumstances and returned to the United States, where he settled in Cambridgeport, outside of Boston. There he spent the remaining 25 years of his life on and off attempting to complete another huge history painting with a biblical subject, Belshazzar's Feast. Nicknamed the American Titian, Alston became a revered figure, greatly admired by such New England luminaries as Margaret Fuller, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. I would add that the town of Alston, outside of Boston, is named after him. Daniel Huntington, our second artist, was well known in his day. A sought-after portraitist, for almost 6 decades he produced images of the wealthy and the famous that bear comparison with portrait paintings painted by his counterparts in London and Paris. And I always thought of work like this as sort of Victorian American. It's of a very, very wealthy merchant named Benjamin Field, who, as you can see, he and his wife were very much involved with the arts as collectors. Huntington was also well known for his allegories, especially for Mercy's Dream, a scene from Pilgrim's Progress, which he depicted several times, and the version we are looking at in 1841 is the first of 4. Huntington executed. And I think it's symptomatic of what we were talking about, that he didn't have to explain what the title was. I would guess that most of those audience knew exactly what this is. And this is from part 2 of Pilgrim's Progress, when Christiana goes on pilgrimage with her children and with her neighbor Mercy. The third artist was Huntington's brother-in-law, the still life, portrait, and landscape painter Cornelius Verbrick. Around 1837, Cole became a close friend of the younger artist. He admired his high intellectual gifts, quote, and greatly enjoyed, quote, the companionship of a congenial mind. Verbrick died on May 31st, 1844, at the age of 31. A few weeks later, in response to a request from the National Academy of Design, Cole published an obituary in which he celebrated the late artist's keen, quote, keen sensibilities and his love of the beautiful. And that obituary is more or less the chief source of information we have about Verbrick. I wasn't able to find a decent reproduction of any of his works on the World Wide Web. 2 years later, Cole completed a picnic party, which, as the curator Teresa Carbone discovered, was intended as a memorial for Verbrick. Cole depicts his friend as a melancholy, otherworldly figure looking toward heaven while singing and accompanying himself on a guitar. To his right, a standing woman, you can't miss her, weaves a crown of laurel leaves, no doubt intended for Verbrick. Now that we're acquainted with the dramatis personae, let's move on to the plot. In 2015, an art dealer asked me to look at the painting you see on the screen, which he believed to be the work of Thomas Cole. This painting closely resembles a painting I knew from the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, called View of the Thames. I also knew Cole had painted the first work from a sketch Verbrick had made in England, a fact confirmed by the inscription on the painting the dealer had shown me. In the summer of 1843, Verbrick traveled to England with his new wife, Sarah Richards, his brother-in-law, Daniel Huntington, and Huntington's wife, Harriet Sophia Richards. Touring outside of London, Verbrick made sketches of the Thames near Twickenham. He and his wife had planned, after that, to accompany the Huntingtons on a trip to Italy, but instead returned to New York. Verbrick, who had for years suffered from tuberculosis, was now terminally ill. Earlier, Cole had obtained a commission for his friend from the merchant financier Jonathan Sturgis, one of the, in many ways, the biggest funder of Hudson River School landscape painting up to his death in 1872. So Sturgis commissions vehicle Verbrick to do a view of the Thames. Because Verbrick was too sick to fulfill the commission, Cole executed the painting for Sturgis from Verbrick's now lost sketches. Cole thus executed two paintings of the same Thames River view, one for Sturgis and, I believe, one for himself, the latter more colorful and thus more hopeful than the former. Besides exhibiting familiar Colean attributes, the dealer's painting carries, as I said, an inscription that suggests Cole meant the picture to be yet another memorial for Brick. The inscription probably rendered the painting unsaleable, at least during Cole's lifetime, but it explains the genesis of the work. As you can probably make out, it reads T. Cole from an outline by C. Brick. Since the dealer had asked me to authenticate the painting, I decided to look into Cole's relationship with Brick. Here is where I struck gold in the form of a letter that sheds light on what Cole had written in Maria from Paris, and on the reasons he decided to paint a second version of the Voyage of Life. In the letter dated July 21st, 1841, Brill describes how he and Daniel Huntington had traveled to Boston, where they visited Washington Allston at his home at Cambridgeport. Quote, "He was, as usual, full of delightful talk," end quote. Brill wrote Cole, suggesting he had met Allston on a previous occasion. The two artists sat up with Allston until midnight, after which they walked back to the Tremont House Hotel. Brill also reported that, quote, "He," meaning Allston, said if he, meaning Cole, thinks of remaining in England, tell him not to be discouraged until he has tried it for 2 years. Brill underlined the word 2 years. He also threw in his own 2 cents. He said, "I do not think it's a good idea." From the letter, we can deduce the following. First, that Cole had been considering moving to London, where he may have imagined he might find better support for his historical paintings. Second, he had shared this idea not only with Mariah, but also with Brill. Huntington, with Brill, and also with Huntington and very likely others. Cole probably wanted Allston's advice, since, as we've seen, Allston had earlier enjoyed a highly successful career in London. In addition, we know that he had traveled to Europe in 1841 with sketches of the Voyage of Life, planning to paint a second version in Rome. Cole considered the series his finest work to date, and probably hoped it might win the sort of approval from European audiences the first version had won from audiences in New York. In a letter dated 6 August 1841, that is a day before he sailed from New York City for England, Cole told Mariah that he had given up his idea of bringing the first version of the Voyage of Life to London. "The fact is," he explained, "I care very little about the matter now." That's the whole business he had with Huggins. "It will be more profitable to me to paint them again." End quote. Cole did a brief tour in England and then made his way to Rome via Paris. In an extraordinary tour de force of research, Paul discovered that, quote, I'm quoting Paul Schweitzer now, 4 days after Cole's arrival in Rome on 11th November 1841, the front page of a Roman cultural weekly featured an Italian transcription of Cole's descriptions of the Voyage of Life. The unidentified author of the short paragraph preceding the descriptions hinted that Cole planned to exhibit the paintings in the city in the future. So he publicized it immediately. And Cole, how did you find that? Amazing. Cole completed the paintings in early April 1842 and then put them on view in an exhibition organized by the city's Society for Fine Art Collectors and Connoisseurs in the Palazzo della Dogana, located in the Piazza del Popolo. He then left Rome for a tour of Sicily. Returning to the city towards the end of May, he wrote Mariah that the paintings, quote, have evidently created a sensation in the outside world of Rome, and I'm told frequently by the Italians that I have gained great honor. He went on, but my dear, they did not sell. And then wrote, underlined, neither did I expect they would. Okay. According to Cole, the paintings had failed to sell because, quote, the wealthy foreigners had left Rome before the paintings were exhibited. I shall take them to England, and if I do not dispose of them readily there, I will bring them home for our children, little Fetty and Mary, to study. Quote. However, by the time he wrote Mariah, he was already harboring doubts about the possibility of selling the paintings in London, since, as he had learned, they didn't accord with English taste. So he's already conjuring up rationalizations. He said, as he wrote in his journal the day after he had written Mariah, the English favored, quote, pictures without ideas, mere gaudy displays of color and chiaroscuro, without meaning, showy things for the eyes. Ultimately, he shipped the series directly from Rome to New York. Yet, despite his scathing evaluation of English taste, Cole did not give up on his dream of London art world success. This may seem counterintuitive. 8 years earlier, 1833, after his return to the United States from his first European tour, Cole wrote a lengthy and extraordinarily candid letter to William Dunlap, history painter, playwright, and theater historian, now mainly remembered for his encyclopedic history of American art, which he published in 1834. He's been nicknamed the American Vasari. Vasari is founder of Italian art history, wrote during the Renaissance also as a painter. Okay. In his letter to Dunlap, which to his mortification, Dunlap published directly, just send it right off the printers, in his history unedited, Cole described his experience during the 22 months he had spent in London in terms that would have gratified even the most rabid American cultural nationalist. English artists were, quote, cold and selfish. English art was, quote, with few exceptions, meretricious, and even Turner, quote, prince of the evil spirits, as Cole characterized him. Having earlier produced pictures that were, quote, beautiful and true, though rather misty, was now creating works that were, quote, gorgeous but altogether false. He complained that the London art world had ignored his paintings, that even two expatriate American artists in London, C.R. Leslie and Gilbert Stuart Newton, had shown scant interest in his work, and that the paintings he sent for exhibition to the Royal Academy and British Gallery ended up in the most exalted, as he underlined the word, in the most exalted positions, that is hung near the ceiling, or in the language of the day, skied. Cole allowed that at the Gallery of the Society of British Artists, he had enjoyed a moderate success with his Tornado in the American Wilderness, and that via introductions from his patron Robert Gilmore and the novelist James Fenimore Cooper, he had profited from contact with Sir Thomas Lawrence, the president of the Royal Academy, the poet Samuel Rogers, and Samuel's brother Henry. Yet Cole's letter is striking for the way the artist portrays himself as a painter of American landscapes who inevitably suffers neglect in the sophisticated and corrupt London art world, and whose, quote, heterodox opinion of Turner and other contemporary English artists were based on nothing other than the standard of, quote, beautiful nature itself. Cole's letter to Dunlap recalls the prickliness and xenophobia that so often characterized American responses to foreign criticism, responses that, when it came to the former mother country, compensated for unacknowledged or barely acknowledged feelings of dependency and inferiority. Consequently, if we ask what accounts for the aggrieved tone that permeates Cole's letter to Dunlap, the answer seems obvious. The scorn Cole heaped on the London art world represented a backhanded acknowledgement of its immense cultural authority, his bitterness, the displacement of the chagrin he felt at its failure to recognize his accomplishments. It should therefore come as no surprise that back in Catskill after his second European trip, Cole closely followed the ongoing competitions for the decoration of the recently rebuilt Houses of Parliament. In 1844, when a third competition was announced, the artist decided to enter, knowing that his painting might win a premium of £200, £300, or £500, a fortune in those days, and it might be purchased for permanent display in Parliament. Moreover, as a curator, Patricia Junker has written, entrants were aware that, quote, this venue afforded far-reaching opportunities, since the competition would be seen by thousands of visitors at Westminster Hall, as well as scrutinized by critics, that the most popular works would be reproduced in the widely read London Illustrated News and possibly elsewhere, and that a prestigious mural commission might also result. Cole may have thought that his Prometheus Bound, an 8-foot-long canvas featuring a historical subject, a somewhat stiffly painted academic nude. Oh, forgive this, but when I look at his Prometheus, I always think of one of the Smith brothers. Okay, so an 8-foot-long canvas featuring a historical subject, somewhat stiffly posed academic nude, pinioned to a mountain in a mainly barren, rocky landscape, might attract the judges and the public's attention. However, the painting was badly hung and went unremarked by all but one London newspaper. Earlier in May 1847, a month before the opening of the Westminster Hall exhibition, a writer for the New York Literary World had applauded Cole's Prometheus when it was displayed at the New York Gallery of the Fine Arts. It was applauded for the way it gave, quote, a dignity to art which the mass of modern artists do not seem to appreciate. But Cole's New York celebrity did not translate to London. The London Art Union carried brief notice of the painting, concluding rather non-committally that the, quote, the work is distinguished by valuable points, end quote. When Cole's mythological subject, while Cole's mythological subject fell within the guidelines set forth by the Royal Commission, landscape painting at the competition was, as one London commentator observed, quote, out of court. Unsurprisingly, the biggest prizes went to figure paintings with subjects drawn from British history. Cole believed that success in the competition depended, quote, so greatly on the influence of friends, end quote. He thus persuaded painter Leslie, to pass on a letter to the painter Charles Eastlake, who was a bureaucratic big shot, as secretary of the Royal Commission, which was responsible for the program for decorating the House of Parliament. Leslie reported back to Cole that he had, quote, sent your letter to Mr. Eastlake as the best means of securing attention to your picture. Cole also wrote a letter to Peter Ainsley, an artist who was acting as his London agent, regarding his eligibility to enter the competition, a letter that in all probability rehearsed arguments Cole had also set forth in his letter to Eastlake. With his usual vehemence, Cole asserted, quote, in the first place, I was born in England of English parents. In the second, I've lived in England the full term required of foreigners who are, according to the announcement, considered eligible, end quote. In the section devoted to Cole in his 1834 history, Dunlap remarked, quote, so strong is Cole's desire to have the right to call the United States his, which he feels, in italics, to be his, that I've heard it said, he has exclaimed, quote, I would give my left hand to identify myself with this country by being able to say I was born here, end quote. Cole's letter to Ainsley suggests that by 1846 he had changed his mind. Or rather that even in that heyday of patriotic ideologies, national identity was of far less importance to Cole than artistic renown. In 1837, he had hoped to be one of the painters selected to receive a commission to create a historical work for one of the 4 remaining vacancies in the United States Capitol Rotunda. He wasn't chosen, which no doubt added to his frustration with American patronage. Ironically, failing to secure a place for his work in the US Capitol, we find him in 1846 hoping to place a work in Britain's most sacred civic space, the Houses of Parliament. Finally, in his biography of Cole, Noble furnishes the key to the artist's transatlantic aspirations and to the principal reason for Cole's decision to paint a second version of The Voyage of Life. According to Cole's biographer, in 1821, and this passage I think hasn't been attended to enough. According to Cole's biographer, in 1821, while living with his parents and sisters in Steubenville, Ohio, the 20-year-old Cole met an itinerant portrait painter named Stein, who lent him an English treatise on painting. In Noble's recounting, Cole studied the book and, quote, Here's a really good sample of Noble's prose. Quote, "A curtain suddenly rose. His heart was on fire. While the long train of old masters, Raphael, Titian, Claude, Salvator, passed before him like so many celestials, the names of modern artists sounded like titled heroes. His ambition and resolve to become a painter were complete," end quote. Typically, Noble embellishes a story he may have heard from Cole or Cole's family. Nevertheless, as so often, Cole's account likely contains some kernel of historical truth. For it was clearly Cole's ambition to become a latter-day Raphael, Titian, Claude, or Salvator that drove his career. And as it turns out, for reasons that have far more to do with our values than with those of his contemporaries, he became, as Noble might have put it, one of the history of American art's titled heroes. Thank you. Anybody have questions, comments, corrections? Yes?
So I have a set of postcards of the Voyage of Life
Yes.
from Hudson, from
Yeah.
the National Gallery.
Yeah.
Even on a postcard, with a little study, one can discern the very slight differences.
Sure.
But there's also a set from the Albany Institute.
Yeah.
One of which is labeled a study, the other three are not.
Mhm.
And all four are very different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think that was his first idea for the series.
Okay?
And he showed it to, it's important to know that Noble only got to Catskill about 1843, and as a result of competition within the Episcopal Church between high and low church. And Noble was the highest of the high church. And there was a Reverend Phillips here in Catskill who departed unexpectedly. Cole had been close to Phillips and was stricken. He didn't understand why Phillips had been sent away. But Phillips had looked at the series. I think Cole reconceived it. He thought of it, how am I mean, if you took those small, Paul probably has something to say about this, but if you took the small paintings in Albany and blew them up, they would not have the sort of detail and dramatic effect that the final, the first version has.
Right.
Yeah. Other comments, please. Here, yeah.
It's
Hudson.
me again. Yeah. The display in the National Gallery in DC has them displayed sort of in the round,
That's right.
sort of
Yeah.
from each
Yeah.
other, and so it brings to my question of how did Cole conceive of them originally being displayed? Was he just
I think he wanted to see them in line.
in
Yeah.
line?
Yeah, and I think the space that he worked in, especially when you have people coming in and out of the room, if people are endlessly circulating, a room that just has a door and maybe windows, it probably would have worked too well. So I think, you follow them along as you would follow a story, and, with your copy of Cole's narrative in hand. But, when I first saw that, I went into the National Gallery, will this work? And it does. Thank you, Frank Kelly, who is the curator.
Well, it looks great, but it seems like Cole's intention, correct me if I'm wrong, is that it's a teaching. It's like a Bible story.
That's right. Yes, absolutely. But it's didactic. I mean, originally, emblems were a game in Italy in the Quattrocento. Then they were taken up by the Counter-Reformation, and then the Protestants took it over from the Catholics. And Quarles, Francis Quarles, is the person who really initiates this in England before the English Revolution in the early 17th century. And we saw one example of that. And Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress is meant to be didactic. And the whole idea of teaching virtue is that a history painting is didactic. It gives you what was called the exemplum virtute, the example of virtue, which you, the viewer, are being instructed in. You're being taught to emulate this. So the Voyage of Life was about how the voyager learns that the only way he can be saved is through faith. So it's supposed to teach you that. Many years ago, I was probing around in the stacks of Columbia and trying to learn a little more about Bunyan, and I found a German PhD dissertation from the 1930s called Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress als Erzieherbuch, which is a learning book, an education book. And just out of curiosity, how many people here have read Pilgrim's Progress? No? 2 people. It's amazing. This is not the same country Cole lived in, antebellum America, but everybody knew it. That's why, Huntington's painting of Mercy, he didn't have to explain anything, because people read it again and again. The only time I've ever heard it read was when I was driving through northern Maryland, where there was a radio station that used to broadcast in play-like form Pilgrim's Progress, religious radio station, needless to say. But I can't recommend it enough, as our language is pervaded with metaphors from Pilgrim's Progress. Vanity Fair, for example, is from Pilgrim's Progress. Along with the Bible, the King James Bible and Shakespeare, it's one of the deep foundations of modern English. And I would say Cole had to have read it. There's no way he could not have read it. And at one point in 1818, he was hired as an engraver's assistant to do to work on illustrations for an edition of Bunyan's Holy War. Bunyan wrote, even though he was in jail for 12 years, he wrote volume after volume after volume and he was in jail because he was the most eloquent preacher you could imagine, and he refused to swear that he would not preach in public, and therefore he was thrown in jail. But his book reached, far more people than he could ever have preached to. I can't recommend it enough. If you have any historical imagination about English language, reading it is a pleasure, even if it doesn't coincide with your religious beliefs. Yes, please.
Hi, Alan.
Hi.
Christine.
Yeah, hi. So nice to see you.
I've had the great privilege over the years of studying Jonathan Sturge's. I've published things on him, and I have access
This is the world's expert on Jonathan Sturgeon.
to the house that he lived in and the family still owns. And most of the valuable paintings, all of them were sold years ago, but there's still morsels of things that turn up.
Yeah.
Sometimes shoved in drawers. And included a letter that I wound up selling to Alana written to Kean about being in Athens and working on the Parthenon. So that I just found that lying around, and there were several Cole letters, one of which was very, very interesting, and I remember the excitement of the discovery of that second study. in which it said, I think it was from either Cole or Daniel Huntington. Well, Huntington painted a Verbright painting, and who knows what happened to it or where it was. And it was the choice of to be offered to Jonathan Sturges or, and I had a concussion, so my memory is off, another major patron of that day. They were going to get to decide who would keep which small study. And Huntington, as the scholars know, is largely forgotten. So who knows where that painting is, or
Well,
what it looked like.
Yeah, well, I think there were two, I think I know that there were two paintings involved. Huntington may be forgotten, although he was really central to the whole New York
Yeah.
art world for decades. And I would say if you've walked into any museum or public space in New York with, some bearded worthies from the 19th century,
Yes.
there's a Huntington
Yes,
portrait among
yes.
them. Yeah. Thank you.
Please join us in the Cole Center for refreshments and to continue the conversation with Dr. Wallach. Thank you all for coming.